Let's move on to another story that we've been watching closely that now seems to be nearing a conclusion, or at least the next phase, and that's Nvidia and ARM Holdings. Nvidia had been planning to buy ARM from SoftBank for $40 billion. They agreed to that deal back in September of 2020. Now they're saying, not going to do it. And that's because it had faced a lot of regulatory hurdles. Now SoftBank instead, ARM's going to be a public company. Dan Howley has been following all of the developments for this. So this was going to be what? The biggest chip deal ever, right, Dan? Oh, Dan, I think you're muted. No, not muted? Here you are. I hear you.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. That's right. That's part of the reason why there's been so much regulatory pushback from around the world, really. This kind of started hitting a wall in the UK where ARM is based. They started looking at it as a national security concern. We didn't even get to the EU or China, which were also supposed to look over it, because then that Federal Trade Commission stepped in and they filed suit against Nvidia to block the deal. At that point, they had basically said this proposed deal would distort ARM's incentives in chip markets and allow the combined firm to unfairly undermine Nvidia's rivals. So it was basically the idea that because Nvidia would own ARM, Nvidia is an ARM customer, Nvidia would have the incentive to then block its competitors from being able to access that kind of chip technology from ARM. We're talking the likes of Qualcomm, we're talking the likes of Intel. Basically every company under the sun uses some form of ARM chips. So they essentially said, look, we're not going to allow this to move forward. Now, this morning we had Jensen Huang, he's the CEO of Nvidia, come out and say basically that though we won't be one company, we will partner closely with ARM. The significant investments that that's Masayoshi-san of SoftBank Group, has made have positioned ARM to expand the reach of the ARM CPU beyond client computing up to supercomputing, cloud, AI, and robotics. And that was the way that Jensen was originally positioning this deal. It would allow Nvidia to make significant investments into ARM to push them forward into areas like AI and the cloud. And because the ARM chips aren't necessarily used so much in the cloud, it's really Intel, AMD, and to a lesser extent Nvidia. They wanted to see if they could push ARM into the cloud more and really take on the likes of Nvidia and AMD in the cloud space. But this deal not going through, and Nvidia is still on the hook for $1.25 billion that it has to provide to ARM because the deal fell apart.
Yeah, and the shares of Nvidia are pulling back a little bit this morning. They have been really quite an outperformer, though, over the past several years. But it's interesting, Dan, because you and I spoke to Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang back in November. And even then, he was laying the groundwork for this potentially to not happen and talked about Nvidia's sort of standalone strength. Let's listen to what he said at that point.
We would go forward very nicely as we're going forward today. We have, we support every CPU in the world, and we support x86s of Intel's x86, AMD's x86. We support ARM CPUs of our own. We support ARM CPUs of others, and so we support all CPUs.
So Dan, I'm just curious also what you're hearing from analysts and other folks in the industry, since again this isn't a shocker that it's not happening, but what does this imply for Nvidia going forward?
Yeah, it really does seem like Jensen was just setting that up as we spoke to him there, because look, it's not like ARM isn't going to make its products available to Nvidia, or even that Nvidia wasn't able to access ARM's technology. ARM is the Switzerland of the chip industry, and they allow everybody to use their technology, their chip designs, and go forward and build off of them. So it's not as though Nvidia doesn't already use ARM. In fact, they do. It's actually the chip that powers Nintendo's Switch console is an Nvidia chip based on ARM technology. So they'll continue to be able to have access to that. And then for ARM itself, we'll start to see them attempt to go public in the fiscal year ending before March 2023. But, when investors and analysts were looking at this previously, they essentially had said, look, this looks like it's going to be dead in the water. One analyst I spoke to said this was dead in the water the moment it was announced because they didn't think it was ever going to go through. And I think it was a long shot from there.
Very interesting. We'll see what the demand will be like for ARM itself when it comes back to public markets. So SoftBank expected to IPO it at some point. Thank you, Dan. As we're watching Nvidia as well, Brian Sozzi, I just wanted to mention something else. First of all, Nvidia is typically a trending ticker on YahooFinance.com. Here's a list of the top market caps in the United States in the S&P 500. And Nvidia, you see now at number 7 as of yesterday's close, leapfrogging Meta. I mean, partly that's a function of Nvidia doing well. Obviously, partly it's a function of Meta falling a lot too, Saz.
Yeah, no, it pays to be in plumbing. The market has rewarded AMD, it's rewarding Nvidia, and it's not necessarily rewarding those companies that are building on top of the tech plumbing here. So not surprised to see Nvidia here with its game-changing technologies just blow away Meta. Bye-bye Meta.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about Meta later in the show and the underperformance that we have seen here.